Seconds before I signed a multi-million-dollar contract, my phone buzzed with a private number. A frail voice said, "Samuel, the man across from you isn't your partner. He's the man who ended your father's life." No emotion, no hesitation, just a fact, delivered like a death certificate. And that one sentence didn't just stop the deal, it rewired the man I had been for 60 years. Before we continue, please subscribe to the channel and let us know where you're listening in the comments. I remember the way my hand froze above the dotted line, the pen hovering like it suddenly weighed 100 pounds. The conference room was quiet, too quiet, the kind of silence that only exists in places where money moves faster than conscience. Across from me sat Richard Hale, a man I'd known for almost a decade, a man I'd trusted enough to consider a long-term partner. He was smiling, that polished corporate smile he'd perfected over the years, the kind that never reached his eyes. I'd always thought it was just his personality. Now I wondered if it was something darker. The call ended before I could say a word. No explanation, no follow-up, no chance to ask who she was or how she knew my name. Just a single sentence dropped into my life like a grenade. I lowered the phone slowly, trying to keep my face neutral, trying not to let Richard see the storm that had just erupted inside me. He tapped the table lightly, a gesture he used when he was impatient. "Everything all right, Sam?" he asked, pretending to care. I nodded, but my mind was already somewhere else, somewhere 25 years in the past, in a hospital room where my father had taken his last breath. Back then, the doctors had said it was a heart attack. Sudden, unexpected, nothing suspicious. I'd believed them. I'd believed everyone. I'd been a good man my whole life, a man who trusted easily, forgave quickly, and assumed the best in people. 60 years of clean living, clean business, clean conscience, and now, in one phone call, all of it felt like a long, naive mistake. I set the pen down and leaned back in my chair, pretending to stretch, pretending to think about the deal, but inside, I was replaying every conversation I'd ever had with Richard. Every handshake, every smile, every moment that now felt like a lie. I studied his face carefully, the way his jaw tightened when he thought I wasn't looking, the way his fingers drummed the table with a rhythm that didn't match his calm expression. I'd never noticed those things before, or maybe I had, but I'd never cared enough to question them. "Sam," he said again, this time with a hint of irritation, "we've been negotiating this for months. If you have concerns, speak up." His tone was firm, almost commanding, like he was used to being obeyed. I'd always brushed that off as confidence. Now it felt like something else, control. I forced a smile. "Just thinking," I said. "It's a big step." He nodded, but his eyes narrowed slightly, as if he sensed something was off. I could feel the tension rising between us, a subtle shift in the air that neither of us acknowledged. I needed time. I needed space. I needed to understand what the hell that woman meant. So I closed the folder gently and said, "Let's finalize this tomorrow. I want to review a few numbers again." Richard's smile faded for a fraction of a second. Just a flicker, barely noticeable, but enough to confirm that he didn't like surprises. "Tomorrow?" he repeated, his voice flat. "We've already reviewed everything." I shrugged casually. "Humor an old man," I said. "I like to sleep on big decisions." He didn't argue, but he didn't look pleased either. He stood up slowly, straightened his jacket, and gave me a tight nod. "Fine. Tomorrow." As soon as he left the room, I exhaled for the first time in what felt like minutes. My hands were trembling slightly, not from fear, but from something colder, something sharper. I walked out of the building and into the parking lot, the late afternoon sun hitting my face like a spotlight. I sat in my car for a long moment, staring at the steering wheel, replaying the woman's voice in my head. Who was she? How did she know about my father? And why call me now, after all these years? I drove home slowly, my mind racing. Every red light felt like a moment to breathe, every green light a push into a future I wasn't ready for. When I finally pulled into my driveway, I didn't go inside right away. I stood there, looking at the house I'd built with decades of honest work. The house that held every memory of my father, his laughter, his advice, his quiet strength. I wondered what he would say if he were here. Would he tell me to let it go, or would he tell me to dig until I found the truth? Inside, the house felt colder than usual. I poured myself a glass of water and sat at the kitchen table, staring at the phone in my hand. I checked the call log. Unknown number, no surprise there. I tried calling back, but it went straight to a dead tone. No voicemail, no ring, nothing. It was like the call had never happened, but it had, and it had changed everything. I opened my father's old files, the ones I hadn't touched in years, medical reports, business documents, letters, photos. I spread them across the table like pieces of a puzzle I didn't know how to solve. I read the autopsy report again, line by line, looking for anything unusual. Nothing. Just the same clinical language I'd seen decades ago. But now, every word felt suspicious. I leaned back in my chair, rubbing my temples. The woman's voice echoed in my mind again, steady and certain. He's the man who ended your father's life. Not might have, not could have. She said it like a fact, like she'd been waiting years to say it. I didn't sleep that night. I sat in the living room with the lights off, staring at the shadows on the wall, thinking about my father, thinking about Richard, thinking about the kind of man I had been for 60 years. A man who believed in fairness, a man who believed in justice, a man who believed in letting the law handle things. But this wasn't the law's territory. This was personal. This was blood. By sunrise, I knew one thing for certain. Tomorrow, when I walked back into that conference room, I wouldn't be the same man Richard had known for years. Something inside me had shifted, something deep and irreversible. I wasn't looking for a deal anymore. I was looking for the truth, and once I found it, I knew exactly what I would do with it. I stood up slowly, feeling the weight of the decision settle into my bones. The sun was rising outside, casting a pale light across the room. I walked to the window and watched the world wake up, calm and unaware of the storm building inside me. I didn't know who the woman was. I didn't know why she chose that moment to call. But I knew one thing with absolute certainty. She hadn't lied, and tomorrow I would look Richard in the eyes and see the truth for myself. And that was the moment I realized I wasn't preparing for a business meeting. I was preparing for a confrontation that would change everything. I didn't bother making breakfast. My stomach was too tight, my mind too sharp, and my nerves too steady in a way that didn't feel like nerves at all. It felt like purpose, a cold, deliberate purpose I hadn't felt since I was a young man, trying to prove myself in a world that didn't care whether I succeeded or failed. I showered, shaved, put on the same suit I'd worn the day before, and looked at myself in the mirror. I didn't look angry. I didn't look scared. I looked awake, like a man who had finally stopped lying to himself. The drive to the office felt different this time. The roads were the same, the buildings the same, the morning traffic the same. But I wasn't the same. Every red light felt like a countdown. Every turn felt like a step towards something irreversible. I kept replaying the woman's voice in my head, not because I doubted her, but because I wanted to memorize the tone, the certainty, the way she said it, like she'd been carrying that truth for years. When I pulled into the parking garage, I didn't go straight to the elevator. I sat in the car for a moment, watching people walk in and out of the building. Some were laughing, some were rushing, some were sipping coffee like it was the most important thing in their lives. I wondered how many of them had secrets, how many of them had done things they hoped would never surface, how many of them would crumble if someone whispered the right sentence at the right moment. I stepped out of the car and walked toward the elevator with a calmness that didn't match the storm inside me. The doors opened, and I stepped in alone. As the elevator rose, I felt the weight of the moment settle deeper into my bones. I wasn't going up to sign a deal. I was going up to look a man in the eyes and see whether he flinched. When the doors opened, The receptionist greeted me with her usual bright smile. "Good morning, Mr. Carter," she said. I nodded politely, but my mind was already down the hallway, already in the conference room, already staring at Richard's face. I walked past her, my footsteps steady, my breathing controlled. I reached the conference room door and paused for a moment, my hand on the handle, listening. Silence. I pushed the door open. Richard was already there, standing by the window with his hands in his pockets, staring out at the city like he owned it. He turned when he heard the door, and his smile appeared instantly, too quickly, too perfectly. "Sam," he said warmly, "ready to finish what we started?" I closed the door behind me and walked to the table, placing my briefcase down slowly. "I am," I said, my voice steady. "But before we do, I want to talk." His smile didn't fade, but something in his eyes tightened. "About what?" I sat down, folded my hands, and looked at him the way a surgeon looks at an X-ray. "About my father." He didn't move. Not a twitch, not a blink, just a stillness that felt unnatural. "Your father?" he repeated, as if the word tasted strange. "Yes," I said. "My father." He walked to the table and sat across from me, leaning back in his chair with a casualness that felt rehearsed. "What about him?" I studied his face carefully, the lines around his eyes, the way his jaw tightened for a fraction of a second, the way his fingers tapped the armrest once, then stopped. "I got a call yesterday," I said, "right before we were supposed to sign." His expression didn't change, but the air in the room did. It thickened, it slowed, it waited. "A call from who?" he asked. "An older woman," I said. "She told me something interesting." He leaned forward slightly. "And what exactly did she tell you?" I held his gaze. "She said the man sitting across from me wasn't my partner. She said he was the man who ended my father's life." For the first time since I'd known him, Richard didn't have a response ready. His mouth opened slightly, then closed. His eyes flicked away for a split second, then back to me. It was small, subtle, but it was enough. I didn't speak. I didn't move. I let the silence do the work. Finally, he exhaled slowly. "Sam, you can't seriously believe something like that." "I didn't say I believed it," I replied. "I said I heard it." He nodded, relieved by the technicality. "Good, because that's insane. Your father died of a heart attack. Everyone knows that." I leaned back in my chair. "Do they?" His jaw tightened again. "Yes, they do." I watched him carefully. "Funny thing," I said softly. "The woman didn't sound insane. She sounded informed." He didn't like that. His eyes narrowed. "Sam, you've known me for years. You know who I am." I nodded. "I thought I did." He stood up abruptly, pacing to the window. "This is ridiculous," he said. "Someone's trying to sabotage the deal. That's all this is." "Maybe," I said. "Or maybe someone's trying to tell me the truth." He turned sharply. "And you think the truth is that I killed your father?" I didn't answer. I didn't need to. The question itself was the answer. He walked back to the table slowly, placing both hands on the surface, leaning toward me. "Sam, look at me. Do I look like a murderer to you?" I looked at him for a long moment. His face was calm, his eyes steady, his posture confident. But there was something else, something beneath the surface, something he was trying very hard to hide. "I don't know what a murderer looks like," I said quietly, "but I know what guilt looks like." His face twitched, just once, but it was enough. He straightened up, adjusting his jacket. "This conversation is over," he said. "If you want to sign the deal, we sign it. If not, we walk away. But I'm not entertaining some anonymous phone call." I stood up slowly. "We'll sign," I said, "but not today." He frowned. "Why not?" "Because I'm going to find out who called me," I said, "and I'm going to find out why." His expression hardened. "Sam, don't do this." I picked up my briefcase. "I already did." I walked to the door, opened it, and stepped out. But before I closed it behind me, I looked back at him. He was standing perfectly still, his face unreadable, his hands clenched at his sides. And in that moment, I knew something with absolute certainty. He was scared, not of losing the deal, not of losing me, but of what I might find. I walked down the hallway with a calmness that felt almost unnatural. I didn't know who the woman was. I didn't know what she knew, but I knew where to start. My father's past wasn't a mystery. It was a trail, a long, winding trail filled with people, decisions, enemies, and secrets. And I was going to follow every step of it. Because this wasn't about business anymore. This was about blood, and I wasn't stopping until I reached the end of the trail. Even if the end of that trail led straight back to Richard. Even if it led to something darker. Even if it led to a truth I wasn't ready for. I stepped into the elevator, the doors closing slowly, sealing me into a quiet metal box that felt like the beginning of something dangerous. And as the elevator descended, I realized something else, something colder, something sharper. I wasn't looking for answers anymore. I was hunting, and I knew exactly where to begin. I drove straight to the one place I had avoided for years, my father's old storage unit on the east side of town. It wasn't much to look at, just a row of metal doors, faded numbers, and a rusted lock that had outlived its purpose. I hadn't opened it since the week after his funeral. Back then, I was too broken to care what was inside. Now, I was too determined not to. The key felt cold in my hand as I slid it into the lock. It clicked open with a stiffness that told me no one had touched it since the day I walked away. When I lifted the door, the smell of dust and old paper hit me like a memory I wasn't ready for. Boxes stacked neatly, tools hung on the wall, a workbench with his handwriting still etched into the wood. It felt like stepping into a frozen moment of his life. I turned on the small overhead bulb, and the room lit up with a dim yellow glow. I started opening boxes one by one. Old ledgers, contracts, letters, photos. My father had kept everything, organized with the precision of a man who believed every detail mattered. I sifted through documents for nearly an hour before I found something that made my breath catch. A folder labeled Hale. I sat down on the workbench stool and opened it slowly. Inside were notes, handwritten, detailed, dated. My father had been tracking Richard long before he died. Meetings, transactions, discrepancies, names I didn't recognize. And at the bottom, a single page torn from a notebook, written in my father's shaky handwriting from his final months. If anything happens to me, look at Hale. He's not who he says he is. My hands tightened around the paper. My father had known. He'd tried to warn someone, maybe me, maybe anyone who would listen, but he died before he could finish the story. And now, decades later, a stranger had picked up the thread he left behind. I kept digging, more notes, more connections. A pattern began to form, one that pointed to financial manipulation, hidden partnerships, and a trail of money that didn't make sense. My father had been onto something big, something dangerous, something that might have gotten him killed. I closed the folder and sat there for a long moment, staring at the concrete floor. The truth wasn't a mystery anymore. It was a direction, a path, and I was already walking it. I left the storage unit and drove to the address listed on one of the documents, a small house on the outskirts of town. The name next to it was Margaret Hale, Richard's mother. The woman who had called me? Maybe. Or maybe someone who knew more than she should. The house was old but well kept, with a small garden and a porch swing that creaked in the wind. I walked up the steps and knocked. No answer. I knocked again, louder this time. Still nothing. I was about to leave when I heard the faint sound of footsteps inside. The door opened slowly, revealing a frail woman with silver hair and tired eyes. She looked at me for a long moment, as if trying to decide whether she recognized me. Then she spoke, her voice soft but steady. "You came." I froze. "It was you," I said quietly. "You called me." She nodded once. "I've been waiting for you, Samuel." She stepped aside and I walked in. The house smelled like old books and lavender. Photos lined the walls, family pictures, birthdays, holidays, and in almost every one, Richard stood smiling, his arm around someone, his eyes cold even in the stillness of a photograph. She led me to the living room and sat down slowly. I sat across from her, my hands clasped tightly. "Why did you call me?" I asked. She looked down at her hands. "Because I'm dying," she said, "and I don't want to leave this world with the truth buried." I waited. She took a shaky breath. "Your father was a good man. Too good. He trusted people he shouldn't have. He trusted my son." My chest tightened. "Tell me what happened." She nodded slowly, as if gathering strength. "Your father discovered something. Something about a deal Richard was involved in. Something illegal. Something dangerous. He confronted him. They argued. And that night, your father collapsed." I leaned forward. "Collapsed? Or was he helped to collapse?" She closed her eyes. "Richard didn't mean to kill him, but he didn't help him either. He let him die. He watched him die." The room felt colder. My breath felt heavier. "Why didn't you come forward?" She looked at me with eyes full of regret. "Because he's my son, and because I was a coward." Silence filled the room, thick and suffocating. She reached for a small box on the table and pushed it toward me. "Your father gave me this the day before he died. He said if anything happened to him, I should give it to you. But I couldn't. Not until now." I opened the box. Inside was a flash drive and a letter. My father's handwriting. My throat tightened as I unfolded it. "Sam, if you're reading this, it means I didn't make it. Don't trust Hale. Follow the money, and don't let him bury the truth." I closed the letter slowly, my hands trembling. The woman watched me with sad eyes. "I'm sorry," she whispered. I stood up. "Don't be," I said quietly. "You did what you could." I left the house with the box in my hand and a storm in my chest. The sun was setting, casting long shadows across the street. I walked to my car, opened the door, and sat down. I didn't start the engine. I just sat there, staring at the steering wheel, feeling the weight of everything I had learned. My father hadn't died of a heart attack. He had died of betrayal. I drove straight to the office. The building was mostly empty, the hallways quiet. I walked to the conference room, turned on the lights, and placed the box on the table. Then I plugged the flash drive into my laptop. Files, dozens of them, documents, emails, transactions, proof. All of it pointing to Richard, all of it confirming what the woman had said. My father had uncovered a scheme that would have destroyed Richard's career, and Richard had chosen to let him die rather than face the consequences. I closed the laptop and leaned back in my chair. The room felt too small, the air too thin. I wasn't angry. I wasn't shaking. I wasn't even surprised. I was ready. The next morning I walked into the office early. Richard arrived shortly after, his expression confident, his stride steady. He walked into the conference room and froze when he saw me sitting there, the box open on the table. "What's this?" he asked. I looked at him calmly. "The truth." He glanced at the documents, then at me. "Sam, whatever you think—" I cut him off. "I don't think. I know." His jaw tightened. "And what exactly do you plan to do?" I stood up slowly. "What my father couldn't?" He swallowed hard. "Sam, don't do this." I walked past him, opened the door, and looked back one last time. "You should have helped him," I said quietly. "You should have saved him." His face went pale. I stepped into the hallway and closed the door behind me. By noon, every board member, every partner, every investor had the files. By evening, Richard's career was over. By nightfall, his reputation was gone. And by the next morning, the world knew exactly what kind of man he was. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't break the law. I didn't touch him. I just told the truth. And the truth destroyed him. When it was over, I drove to my father's grave. The wind was cold, the sky gray. I stood there for a long time, my hands in my pockets, my heart strangely calm. "I did it," I whispered. "I finished what you started." The wind rustled the leaves as if answering. I close my eyes and let the silence settle around me. Not peace, not closure, just truth. And sometimes truth is enough. If you like this story, please like this video, subscribe to the channel, and share your impressions of this story in the comments. Thank you for watching.